One of the easiest ways to level up your carvings is to focus on the details. Now, first and foremost, the details fill in the gaps, for lack of a better phrase. You have to lay the foundation first before you work up to worrying about the details. You have to have a good carving before you can make it a great carving. So focus on getting the small things right to begin with. But when it comes time, taking your time to add those little details can transform your piece from good to great. One of the easiest ways to add details is to focus on the hair. So this guy here, I've been working on this pirate, and generally hair is one of the last things I carve, but I figured I had a minute here, so I would go through the process on how I would add a hair to a guy like this. Now, this being a pirate and whatnot, his hair is going to look completely different than the Santa. I want the Santa's beard and hair to be nice and soft and fluffy. This pirate, I want the hair to be coarser. I want it to be wild. I want it to look unruly. So, how do I do that? Well, I'll pull it off with just a couple of tools. First and foremost, we want to establish a flow pattern. I don't want any straight lines here. I want this flow pattern to work kind of in one general direction, but I'm going to be laying in soft S curves. Just kind of randomly. If you can see here, I've already kind of established the base of the beard, and I have some cutouts here, so I'm gonna use those to my advantage when I'm laying in this initial flow pattern. And of course, not just his beard, but we need to look in at the hair on the back of the head as well. And this is going to be the same thing. This is going to be the base for the hair. And I'm just going to take my knife, and this is going to be a fairly deep cut. Now, I'm not trying to cut all the way in, but I don't know how well you can tell. I've probably got that knife stuck in somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to take that sliver out. Again, just trying to keep from making any straight lines here. You will potentially get some knife scars doing it this way that you have to kind of clean up. But at least the way I finish by adding boiled linseed oil, a lot of those scars will close up and you will not be able to notice them. So there's one. Let's move on to the next one. In some areas, we've got to worry about carving downhill, so you won't be able to take that sliver out all in one whack without risk of blowing off a huge chunk there that you don't want to lose. There's two. We're going to go all the way around the piece, putting in this flow pattern. Now I want to, in areas that are going to be visible like that, I want to break up that hard outline at the edge of the beard. And you don't have to try to make these all the same width or anything. Throw some variety in there. This guy's out on the high seas, he's got windswept hair. Like, it is not going to be a freshly styled beard. And of course, you can also go from a smaller little sliver and open up more toward the edge as well to give you another look. All we're doing here is playing with the light, how the light interacts with the piece, throwing extra shadows in there. And as we've stated before, those shadows are the difference maker. That's what makes a piece stand out. Of course, need to clean up around the edge a little bit. And we'll move on and do the back or his hair while we're here. If you're not as confident with your knife control, you can lay these lines in with a V-tool, unless you have a fairly small V-tool, or a narrow but with a long reach, you're going to have trouble in some areas. But you can always lay the initial lines in with the V-tool, go back and deepen them with the knife if you want. I've done enough of these that I'm pretty confident in my abilities with the knife. And to be honest with you, if a piece wants to chip out or break off on me, I'll just go with the flow. We can fix any potential issues down the line, especially on a piece like this. All right, so there are the first steps. That's kind of where we're at. And I want to come back in and work off of those lines. Throw a few little extra breaks in, just so I don't have one long uninterrupted line. Just kind of, that's kind of boring to my eye. I'm not going to be quite as aggressive with these, because you're much more prone to break off large chunks that you don't want to lose if you get too aggressive here. One thing I want to be mindful of is the flow of that hair and how I'm building layers. I want anything underneath to flow, or anything on the lower side to flow up underneath the upper side. So I'm pushing, or I'm relieving that wood from the bottom up, so that I've got that flow pattern established. And just take a look at your piece as you're working along. we're nowhere near the final stages here. We're going to do a lot more to it. It may not look quite right to you yet. That'll be fine. We'll work on that as we go along. Again, I'm trying to avoid any kind of uniformity. I don't want any kind of discernible pattern here. I want this to look random. Let's add one more right here. All right, kind of the same thing on the hair. We're going to continue to follow the same flow pattern. We just want to break up those large chunks a little bit. I do find that an upsweep knife helps with this. The reason being, you can make these turns and get into and out of these cuts easier. Straight blade is going to want to, I don't know what the proper word is, almost bog down on you. You're going to hit these fibers and it's not going to want to make that turn. If you have a fine tip on a straight blade, you can make it work. Just be mindful, if you feel too much resistance, you should probably stop, back out, and approach it from a different angle. All right, clean things up a little bit. We're going to have to come back and do some final cleanup in the end. So if your not cuts at this point aren't the cleanest, it's not going to be a big deal. Moving on from there, we're going to grab, actually, I'm going to use, so I don't generally use a V-tool on hair, typically. Again, I carve a lot of Santas. I don't want hard edges. I don't think a V-tool looks the best on those. But on this guy, it does kind of seem appropriate. I'm just going to think about my flow pattern and lay some fine lines in there. Now, I'm not trying to delineate every single hair. I prefer to lay in layers and just give the impression of the hair flow. But I am, when I'm doing this, being mindful of the way that those layers are flowing. And we established that initial flow pattern. Everything is kind of working off of that. And again, I do not want any straight lines when I'm doing this. Now I will, some areas are smaller. I can't do the big swooping cuts. So I'll throw in a couple of straight cuts in there just to break things up. And spots like this underneath. Yeah, and I'm just looking to add a couple extra shadows in there. It's not a super critical spot that I make sure I have everything completely dialed in. Just as long as when I do my finishing, I've got a spot for the highlights and the lowlights. Now when it comes to finishing a beard like this, I will generally not paint this all one color. I'm building these layers in. I want to showcase them. So I'll add darker values into the low lights. I'll dry brush lighter values on top. I don't use a lot of white for dry brushing on these guys, just because, I don't figure many pirates live to be a ripe old age. So I don't use black a lot either, just because I think, even though, I am from North Carolina and Blackbeard is probably the most famous pirate of all time, I think painting a lot of big blocks of black onto a piece is just boring. Black is an absence of color. If you wanted a darker tone, you could go with like a raw umber and actually mix a touch of blue in with it, and it'll give you a black, but it's not just a solid black. That's one I learned when I was carving decoys. This is the mixture a lot of people use to paint a black duck was I think it's Prussian blue and raw umber, I believe, is in a 50-50 mix, but adjust it to what you like. I've done it with other blues besides Prussian blue, but that was the mixture that everybody recommended at that time for birds. Now you will, when you're doing this, get a lot of what I refer to as little hangnails. You got little fibers that you're not completely severing. They want to hang in there. Usually hitting them with a good stiff brush will break those loose and clean them out. And you have to be careful when you're using a small gouge like this, not to try to go too deep, because those wings catch and break off the sides. Now, somewhere like, in the eyebrows, it's really critical. It's easy to take off an eyebrow with a tool this size. Here, it's not quite as bad. Even if I break a chunk off, I'm just going to move on with my day. It's not going to be a big deal. We're just going to keep doing this all the way around the beard. All right. Whoop. There's that. Now, I mentioned something about cleaning out cuts. I want to come in and just randomly, some of these spots that my original cut kind of got closed up. I want to dig out some deeper areas there. Again, not looking to establish any kind of pattern here. I just want randomly deeper areas. And of course, we need to detail his mustache. And I'm going to use this little 1.5 millimeter dockyard for it, just to give me a little bit different texture. Now, the mustache hairs originate from the top and flow down. They don't all come. And then actually, before I move on, one thing I need to do is give this guy some nostrils. I like to do this before I texture the mustache. Just noticed that I hadn't done it yet. So, one common mistake for beginners is thinking these mustache lines flow out from a center line. They do not. They flow from top to bottom. Now, this one, of course, he's got a longer mustache. Those lines are going to flow a little bit more or a little longer. And we're just going to use the same method. I'm going to cut downhill on this one. Just making soft S-curves here, randomly placed. But everything is aiming for that point of origin. I like to leave quite a bit of meat on the mustaches initially so that I can carve in these details. If you want finer details on it, you don't have to leave as much material on the mustache as I did here. And then I want to break up the hard edge here that I've created by forming that mustache. And I'll actually take my knife and just throw in a couple of little breaks in there. Again, that's just another little shadow. You don't have to do a ton of these. But I do think it makes a difference in the end. We'll throw in one more. There's his beard. Let's go to the hair. Now for the hair, I'm going to use a slightly different tool just to give it a different texture. And I'm actually going to start with a V tool here. Just thinking about my flow line. After I get done with the V tool, I'm gonna grab, I think this is the 5mm, number 11 veiner. You know, anything along a small dockyard, small U tool, whatever you got. Don't major in the minors here, just use what you got. Play around with it. And we want to build off of those layers that we've put in. And the same thing, we're gonna go back and clean up some of these spots, throw in some deeper cuts. If you got somewhere like this with a little corner, you can actually do that little chip cut, take that out, and throws you a nice heavy shadow in there. And of course, I'll push all this hair underneath this hat once I get that finished. I'm not quite to that point in the carving yet, but that will be one thing that I focus on, is making sure the head goes, and all the hair goes inside the hat. one thing about using this method is you will get in some tight spots that can be difficult to get those fibers to break loose, or not break loose, but to cut loose. Usually if you kind of back out, you can tell where the wood fibers are attached, and maybe attack it from a different angle and be able to get those severed. But there we have it. That's one way to add quick and easy details to your carving and level them up. So I think we've done a series on eyes, and we've added noses into that, little body parts. May do a series here on details, on how to add details to a piece to level it up. So stick around for the next one. We might work on clothing or something along those lines, but we'll add some more details maybe in the next video. But until next time, happy carving. Please like, subscribe, share, do all those things to feed the algorithm, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.